All right, we are live. Happy Thursday morning, everybody. We are feeling that fall air. I know I'm seeing you all out there talking about it. It's finally that first taste of football weather. We know it's not going to last. We know it's a tease, but let's just enjoy it while we can. And Ben, it's also another big signifier and an important milestone in the fall that we reach every year, which is it's the first time that Alabama had a remotely difficult game, and it means that we've spent all week listening to Alabama fans panicking and arguing with each other amongst themselves about whether or not they should be worried about this team, whether they need to be encouraged by what happened, or, as is the case on talk radio, whether they need to fire the entire coaching staff except for Nick Saban.
I don't know. I mean, why not lump Nick Saban into that group? Put him on the hot seat. There's an old phrase that is tossed around among some Alabama fans in situations like this. It feels like a loss. And I remember watching this game. I remember seeing some people tweeting it, certainly feeling it, watching the game. I remember a Tennessee game I was working one time or at one time. Alabama was up by like 3 or 4 touchdowns, right? Like the game was over before the first quarter got halfway done. And Tennessee scored. They scored a touchdown. And Alabama already had the game in hand. They were covering a huge spread. And I just looked at the student section, and it looked like all of their puppies died. It looked like it looked like Alabama's next 10 seasons were over, that there would not be another championship in Tuscaloosa for the foreseeable future because the other team scored a touchdown, right? So it's normal for Alabama fans to dwell on the negative in the moment, right? Like by the end of it, most of the time, they're going to be fine. They're going to be celebrating and hooting and hollering and happy about the outcome because more often than not, Alabama will have won that game, most likely in dominant fashion. But when it appears to be in doubt, a dark cloud comes over the entire fan base and the entire program, it seems. And if that championship, that national championship, if those hopes are threatened in any way, then it's a dark period for everybody. So it's normal. It happens. And for the most part, Alabama comes out on the other side of it. And they did this past Saturday in Florida. That was a hostile environment, Matt. That place was loud. That place was an amazing atmosphere for college football. So the fact that Alabama went in there, got a win against a top 10 opponent, and is still undefeated, that's a great thing, right? It's something to celebrate if you're an Alabama fan, but they didn't cover, they didn't dominate, and so there are reasons to be upset about it. But I think that's probably true for the team too, right? You get in there, you survive a really tough test, and you come away with lessons to learn for the next week and how you can improve because the season is about to get even more challenging than that.
No question. And I do want to get into whatever you guys think who are watching today. As always on Bammers, and our show every Thursday is going to be brought to you by the Tech Program by Mercedes-Benz. More on that later in the show. But we like to hear from you guys. This show is really built around your opinions and your takes, and that's what we want to hear today. I want to know what side of this you are on as a fan. Are you and the way that I'm phrasing it today, do you feel pride or do you feel panic after this game? And I can see both sides of it. I certainly understand why fans would be worried about it. I think you're coming off of as close to a perfect season as we ever see in modern college football. 2020, I think, probably set some unreasonably high expectations, even for Alabama fans. It was a team that was so rarely challenged. It was a team where the fans so rarely ever actually worried that they were going to lose a game that I think watching the team struggle at all feels like something must be wrong. And we've heard from Nick Saban a number of times, I think, about he wants to see more enthusiasm from the fan base about this team. He said it this week. He said it the week before. He's not sensing it from you guys. He's worried that you guys are forgetting what it feels like to lose and forgetting how special it is to win. And I'm using his words. This is not my opinion, but I think this is an interesting topic because this is not a problem that any other fan base in college football has to deal with. There are not other fan bases who are having this argument about whether or not we should be happy after beating a top 11 team on the road in a nationally televised game. Every other school would be thrilled beyond belief about a win like that. But at Alabama, it means that at least some portion of the fan base is very frustrated and very upset and saying, what do we need to do to fix it? And I'll bring up an example here from BJS on YouTube who says, the problems are systemic. We've been talking about the issues since the first game. And I don't mean to like totally dismiss this comment because sure, there's plenty of things. I mean, Nick Saban himself has said plenty of issues this team still has and needs to get better at. But like this comment, Ben, this is the kind of thing that you read from a school that has like either just experienced its first loss or maybe is really having a rough season. Alabama's undefeated and number one in the country. And this is like kind of how this is how the fan base reacts to a 2-point road win against the number 11 team in the country.
Telling you, feels like a loss. Feels like
but do Alabama fans even remember what a loss feels like?
Well, yeah. How many losses does Nick Saban have at Alabama? Very few, right? Like 17, 18, 20, something like that. I guarantee you most Alabama fans can name every single one of them and recall what happened in vivid detail going one by one. So that's what happens when you lose so few times, especially during the Nick Saban era. I'm sure the same was probably true for the Bear Bryant era, right? Where they lost so infrequently that you remember those. Saban has said it himself. The losses are what stick with him more than the wins even. So it's funny because he says he wants to see more enthusiasm from the fans. The fans want to see more points between Alabama and the other team in separating the teams, right? They want to see that. That's just the way it works. It's like Ben Affleck after Geely bombed at the box office saying, I want to see more enthusiasm from the fans in the box office. You know what I mean? So it's all about performance. Fans are going to respond to performance. So,
yes.
And look, it's a double-edged sword, Matt, because I can remember back in the 2014 season, Alabama went on the road and played Arkansas and came out of it with a very scary, close 14-13 win at Arkansas after Blake Sims found, I think, like DeAndre White in the end zone late in the game for the go-ahead touchdown. Nick Saban had a problem with that, too. The fact that fans and other people were upset that Alabama only won by 1 point. So Alabama beat a better team in a more hostile environment this time. And as the commenter says, Alabama fans are spoiled. That's definitely true in a lot of ways. But Alabama fans can be upset if they want to be upset. The standard at this point is national championship that Nick Saban has set himself. So,
and that's basically what BJS, who I quoted earlier, said. And I do want to give him his say here, who says it's not my standard. This is Saban's. And you're absolutely right. That is. I think it's interesting that the fan base has this level of expectation for the team, and they really have come to model themselves after Saban. They feel like they need to hold the team to the highest possible standard, and I think it's because they see that from Saban. I think they are in many ways emulating him. I think, again, in some ways, I think that Nick Saban sort of created his own monster here, right? Like I think I understand why he says, I want to see more enthusiasm from the fans. I think the fact that we're seeing this reaction that we're seeing after this game is proof that there actually is a lot of enthusiasm. It just doesn't take the same form as it does in a lot of other fan bases. As somebody else up here earlier said, Brian Green said, Auburn looked better losing than Bama did winning last Saturday. And I think a lot of that has to do with fan expectations. Like, it's true. A lot of Auburn fans are reacting with hope and positivity to a loss, whereas Alabama fans are sort of feeling doom and gloom after a win. but that's just what this program has created in its own fan base. I think that Bama fans feel like they know what a team looks like that wins a national championship, and they know when the team looks like they're not playing up to that standard. So it's almost like winning is so beneath their standard at this point. Not that it doesn't matter at all, but that Alabama fans don't get excited about wins because that's not what the goal is. That's not what the standard is. The standard is winning a national championship, and I think that that's where they're focused from day one of the season until all the way through the end of the national title game.
I agree that Nick Saban has created aspects of it since he has been winning as much as he has at Alabama, but that mentality predates Nick Saban. Matt, Alabama fans have expected to win their entire lives before Nick Saban ever got there. This is a fan base that claimed 12 national championships for 17 years before Nick Saban got there, since the 1992 national championship. So through all of the trials and tribulations and the ups and downs that they went through in those 17 years, they still had this expectation that Alabama would reach the mountaintop again. It did, and it did in a way that I don't think anybody foresaw, even the most diehard Alabama fans who thought that Alabama would reach that point again. Nick Saban winning 6 national championships, nobody thought that would happen. And the fact that it has is still pretty unbelievable. But so yes, Nick Saban has created that standard and maintained that standard, and I think it's fine. And I think fans, as Brian Green is pointing out in the comment right there, I think that is fair for fans to basically counter that in terms of saying, well, if Nick Saban is unhappy with the fan base and how they're responding to a win, then you have instilled that mentality in us. And the fact that you are probably upset about aspects about Alabama's intensity, how they finish the games, etc., fans feel the same way. And they are ride or die, I believe, for the most part, but they want to win, and they want to win a certain way. Now, on the other hand, if Alabama looked worse winning, that's a good outcome for Alabama. If you look bad beating a top 10, top 11 team in their home stadium on the road in a hostile environment, and you still walk out of there with the win, you still walk out of there undefeated, and you didn't play your best game, that's really good, right? That means that if you can play better, then you will probably dominate most of the competition, even at an elite level like Alabama did last year.
Yeah, I think that there's still plenty of reason to see both ends of the spectrum here. I think there's plenty of reasons to believe both that this team can win a national championship and that this team could very much underperform what a lot of the other Alabama teams have in recent years. So I think that uncertainty is an uncomfortable place for Alabama fans to live. They don't like that. They don't like not knowing exactly how good the team is. It is, I will remind everybody, how the vast majority of college football fans live every single year of their lives. They don't really know how good their team is going to be until pretty late in the year. And even then, it can still surprise you. Even then, you can have shocking losses. You can have unexpected wins. But those things are not very common for Alabama fans. We're in a period of time where this team basically loses one game in one regular season game like every 3 years or so. So it's unusual to feel like you don't have 100% confidence that they're going to run the table until the playoffs.
Well, Matt, that to me reflects how considerate Alabama fans are about the level of critical thinking they show as fans in terms of how they grade their own team, because the context of a win matters. It really does. Because, you can go back and you can look at the opening games of the season. UCLA beats LSU. Oh my gosh, UCLA is so great now. They're one of the titans of college football again, and Chip Kelly's back. But maybe LSU just was bad, right? Maybe they just weren't very good. Notre Dame beats Florida State in an amazing game. Florida State must be back if they're competing with Notre Dame at this level again, right? Well, then Florida State goes and loses to Jacksonville State. So maybe the team that Notre Dame beat wasn't very good, right? And so you have to consider the context of that win. It's like when Notre Dame goes undefeated in 2012, they're a team of destiny just because they've gone undefeated. But didn't they have like an overtime, like a multiple overtime win over like BYU or somebody that year where it's just like, wait a second, they struggled with these teams. How are they going to do against Alabama or Georgia if they had to play them? Same with Notre Dame a couple of years last year. So again, Alabama fans are right to, again, think critically about how these wins, like the outcomes of these games and like how Alabama won the game and what that might mean for the rest of the season. And Matt, I just want to go back to last season because yes, last year was like almost a flawless season in some regards. There was a game just like this last year.
There really was.
Game.
Alabama, move it up the scale in terms of offense, but it felt very similar.
Alabama
very late.
They escaped Oxford with a win. Yeah. Escaped. That was, I mean, and I'm sure Alabama players would say the same thing, but that was one of the worst defensive performances out of Alabama that I can certainly remember. Maybe the worst I've ever seen, right? Ole Miss basically did whatever they wanted. Thankfully, Alabama did too. Ole Miss's defense happened to be worse than Alabama's that night, and Alabama scored pretty much any time they could have in that game, and so that's why they got out of that one clean. And so that, to me, honestly, that was a scarier game than the Florida game. I never really thought the Florida game was really in doubt. It definitely got a little scary during the second half where it's like, if Alabama can't pick up the pace, whatever. But like Nick Saban said, the offense, for the most part, answered the call. The defense made that critical two-point conversion stop and did what they had to do to win. But there was a scary game last year. And then from that point on, Alabama responded in a really great way. The Georgia game was fairly challenging. That was a game that was kind of tough. So maybe that could be the Ole Miss game this year. Ole Miss, though, I mean, I know we're going to look ahead in a little while, Matt, but Ole Miss kind of has that, oh, we're going to beat Alabama attitude right now. You know what I mean?
Like, they have since Lane Kiffin got there, and we'll see if that's earned or not. But they are a program that now has it in their heads that the standard for them, just like we're talking about, the only thing that Alabama fans care about is winning national championships. The only thing Ole Miss fans care about is beating Alabama because they did it a couple of times in recent history, and it felt great. They loved it. It was the best days of their lives when that happened, and they want to do it again, and they believe that they can do it. So, I mean, look, and last year does not disabuse them of that notion either. They came very, very close last year. But I again, just to kind of wrap us up on this topic, I feel like I'm seeing a combination from most of our commenters of basically saying, look, I am proud of the win, but also I'm always thinking ahead, and I think that this is giving us cause for concern. And I get that. I would say that one of the big differences between this win and what we saw against Ole Miss a year ago, for example, is Florida really was not very balanced in this game. Florida made this game close because they found a thing to do against Alabama's defense that they were not prepared for, and they just did it over and over and over again, and it kept working because Alabama wasn't going to be able to adjust to it during the game when it happened. Ole Miss did almost whatever they wanted last year. They ran it. They threw it downfield. They threw it on the short field. They ran trick plays. They did everything they wanted to do, and they really only lost the game because they made a mistake. They made like one mistake in the game. I think this Alabama defense played half of a really good game. I think the back half of the defense looked really, really good. Florida could not get anything going in the passing game all day. If somebody else wants to come out and run the option against this defense, maybe it's a problem. Maybe it's something that could come back to bite Alabama. But I think for the most part, this felt different to me than that Ole Miss game last year because Ole Miss, I felt like, truly dominated Alabama's defense. This, to me, felt more like Florida found one thing that worked, and they hammered at it over and over again. But beyond that, I think I totally do understand the mindset, and I understand why the fan base reacts this way to close wins. We'll see. Everybody's pointing to 2 weeks from now against Ole Miss. Not the best offensive performance that we've seen for a long time for Alabama either, even though a lot of good things did happen. And one of the things Ben, that a lot of fans are pointing at is the running game, particularly one aspect of it, which is Bryce Young. And he, to this point, does not have a stellar stat line when it comes to running the ball. So far this season, Bryce Young has carried the ball 8 times for -4 yards, and obviously some of that's accounting for sacks. But if you take the sacks out of it, he's run for basically 24 yards on 4 scrambles. Not a factor in the running game up to this point. And I think that surprises a lot of people. I think it's an interesting situation. It's a thing that I've heard echoed all 3 weeks of the season so far. You see fans getting frustrated that Bryce Young does not seem comfortable tucking the ball and running with it. And Nick Saban was asked about it this week, mostly was not very critical of it, said he pretty much is happy with the way that Young is operating the offense. Bryce Young was asked about it later in the week on his own podcast that he does, and I'll read the quote from that. Says, "There was always, I felt like, especially when I was younger, a misconception about quarterbacks, especially quarterbacks who are described as mobile. There have been a lot of people who have done it in a way at a really high level now that have kind of changed that narrative." So in general, what Bryce Young, I think, is saying and he goes on, it's a much longer quote, but in general, what he's saying is, I think I'm being unfairly stereotyped. I think that people are judging my lack of involvement in the run game based on preconceived notions that they had about me that aren't really true. That's not who I am as a quarterback. I'm a pocket passer. I have mobility, but that doesn't mean that I'm a tuck it and run kind of guy. So I'm very curious, first of all, again, as always, fans, get in here and talk about your concerns about this. But Ben, that was a really interesting thing for me to hear from Bryce Young, saying basically, I think people have me wrong. I think people are expecting something of me that's not who I am.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm surprised that we got this explanation from Bryce Young, right? Because it's something that a lot of fans and a lot of folks in the media noticed about his game, and that, as the commenter here just says, oftentimes he has a lot of space in front of him where he can pick up a first down, perhaps even score a touchdown. And we know that Bryce Young is capable, fully capable, obviously a very athletic guy, elusive, very quick, and a guy who can use his legs in a way that a lot of other quarterbacks, especially guys in the pocket where he seems more comfortable, wants to be. But the fact that he came out and said that gives us the explanation that we need, because he obviously wants to be a pocket passer. He wants to look downfield, and he wants to keep that option open for himself. And it's interesting because when, like for instance, when Jalen Hurts was quarterback at Alabama, a big criticism that people had about Jalen was that maybe he would tuck it and run too quickly, and that or throw it away, and that he wouldn't take a look through his progressions. He wouldn't look downfield long enough to see how a play developed. Whereas Bryce Young is doing exactly that. He is trying to see where it opens up so that he can get the pass and get and maximize the yardage and maximize the play and put his team in the best possible position that he can. So I agree. Look, I mean, you want to make the play that helps the team, right? Like whatever's in front of you, whatever the defense is giving you, which is something that Saban and a lot of his quarterbacks like to say, take what the defense gives you. If they're giving you a first down, take the first down, right? If they're giving you a touchdown, take the touchdown. If that means running it into the end zone, great. But Bryce Young obviously is going to play his game. He's going to be the quarterback that he wants to be. He's going to contribute to the team how he feels is best in terms of how he can do that with his skill set. So I don't blame him. He has his own identity as a player, and I'm sure that this is a conversation that Nick Saban and Bill O'Brien have had with him going into the season since these games have been played so far. So I'm sure they're working to get the best possible solution for this. But look, Bryce Young has been pretty excellent so far this year after these 3 games, including the Florida game. Like, if those are bad games for Bryce Young, then the future is very bright for him at Alabama, because he is still a very inexperienced quarterback at the college level. I mean, he has had 3 games now as starter. He has not thrown any interceptions at this point. He has thrown several touchdown passes, has been very efficient. He's looked very poised in the pocket. He obviously has a great arm. He obviously has an amazing skill set that Alabama has yet to fully exploit. So again, the future is very bright for this guy. He's still developing as a player. He's still getting used to it. So I'm sure that we'll see him run more when he has those opportunities, but he's still developing.
Yeah, and several people saying some version of this comment here, which concern about his health because of the lack of depth behind him at quarterback. I think that's certainly a concern. But again, I don't know that that's necessarily why he's not running more. I don't think this is a matter of strategy or scheme. I think it's just how Bryce Young wants to play football. I think he is more comfortable playing that position as a pocket passer. Yes, he can move around in the pocket. Yes, he can avoid contact, which makes the play last longer, gives his receivers a little bit more time to create separation. And I see that as well. An interesting comment here from JG Fitz, who says the receivers getting separation on man coverage is more of a pressing issue. I think that's what we hear from Nick Saban more so far. And I also think that the fact that Saban doesn't really view this as an issue that he wants corrected or that he even feels like needs to be addressed in some way, that to me is also very telling. I it's good to have that dynamic to your offense, and we've seen it play out in a positive way for Alabama. We all remember that SEC championship game that Jalen Hurts won by calling his own number and taking off downfield. But I have to say, just watching Bryce Young move in the pocket, regardless of what his yardage actually is this year, he has that gear. Like, we all know that if that's what the moment calls for, Bryce Young is capable of running and getting a lot of yards with his feet. But I think it's interesting that he still chooses not to so far, because it's A, early in the season, but B, the opportunities to create a big play offensively are usually still going to be more towards the downfield passing game. And I think as that develops, as these receivers get a little bit better, as they get a little bit more comfortable working with Bryce Young, a lot of that may be less of an issue. I think fans may not even be looking at how much green space is in front of Bryce Young once the receivers are getting open faster and further downfield.
Yeah, and look, I mean, again, I said earlier that he's still developing as a quarterback, but this is a guy that Nick Saban believes in. This is a guy that Alabama, the teammates, everybody obviously believe in, that scouts have been extremely high on prior to his arrival at Alabama. And there are still things he can clean up all over the place in terms of like his in-game performance. Like, we're not quarterback experts, but, we can watch and see that he's throwing deep balls off of his back foot, that his slant timing hasn't been perfect so far, that his pocket presence has been great, but there was that intentional grounding moment in the Florida game that was obviously everybody has mistakes that they can clean up and things about their game that they can clean up, including Bryce Young. And I guarantee you that nobody is more critical of it than Bryce Young. Obviously, this is something that he puts a lot of thought into in terms of how he's perceived as a player and what kind of player he wants to be. So again, if this isn't even the best version of Bryce Young that we've gotten so far, then I can't wait to see the rest of it, because I mean, he's been pretty great so far.
I mean, look, as evidenced by the fact that he's currently second in the Heisman race, according to the Vegas odds, right behind Matt Corral. And that question will get resolved real quickly here in the near future as those two face off against each other in Tuscaloosa. So, yeah, interesting side topic that's been going on this week. Ben, the other big piece of news that I think fans have been talking about this week and have been maybe making some future plans around is that 2022 schedule that was released. The SEC went ahead and did that for the entire league. So we knew a few of these games. We knew the non-conference games for Alabama in 2022. Now we've got the full schedule. And I want to pull it up here and take a look at it as we kind of run down, what what this thing is going to look like a year from now. Again, there's nothing that shocking, but to me, the order of the games is very interesting and something worth considering. First off, Utah State and at Texas. I know we're not necessarily hailing the comeback of Texas yet, but a pretty tough opener. I don't know if folks in this part of the country follow very much, but Utah State is no slouch. They're a pretty strong mid-major program. So right off the bat, an interesting non-conference schedule, and then you can see there in gray all of the road games that Alabama has. Again, not the toughest slate in the world, but I think to me, what stands out is looking at that run in November. And that's a pretty tough schedule for Alabama.
Matt, did you just say Utah State would be a tough opener for Alabama?
It's not as, I mean, they might be tougher than Miami, Ben.
Okay. I mean, look, no disrespect to Utah State, but I mean, come on, Matt. Tough opener.
They might be tougher than Texas. If Utah State and Texas played right now, I'm not sure what the line would be.
Look, I see this schedule though, Matt, and I see the first real game in Bryant-Denny Stadium happening October 8th, right?
I think that's fair, yeah.
Like, I mean, yeah, again, no disrespect to those teams or whatever, but man, that's interesting. I mean, Alabama opened with Mercer. Obviously, they're opening with or the next game this weekend that we're going to watch is Southern Miss, and so I guess it's kind of similar in that the first big game, so to speak, that Alabama has in Bryant-Denny in 2021 will happen October 2nd. So it's a very similar schedule, maybe a week later. So it's going to take a while to get started in Tuscaloosa in terms of like that real game day atmosphere that Alabama fans pine for during the offseason, especially with those big SEC matchups. But look, I mean, with Texas though, at Texas, that's going to be great that these home and homes are starting as soon as next season. The fact that a lot of Alabama fans can go to Austin and just like get to experience Austin and that stadium probably for the first time for a lot of fans. And so extremely exciting, but where Texas is at obviously remains to be seen. Like we've seen a lot of programs, including Alabama, take a big step in the new head coach's second season. So next year will be very indicative of how Steve Sarkisian's tenure at Texas will go. And so maybe it's more competitive than people think it will be, regardless of what happened against Arkansas a couple of weeks ago. So that could be a very competitive game.
I think I do wonder how, if any of the sort of specialness of that trip to Texas is lost now that we know that it will be a more regular thing for Alabama fans. It will eventually be a conference game in the coming years.
First time. It'll be the first time, though. You know, like they won't be in the SEC next season, though, right?
No, I mean, unless something dramatic happens.
It's not impossible, though.
It's not impossible, but very unlikely. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, look, there's going to be a lot of brisket. That I'm jealous of. I'm jealous of the brisket. I've never had Austin brisket before, so. I'm at least looking forward to that if I get to go.
Yeah, going back to just kind of the way it all lays out. To me, that November schedule is pretty tough. I think I'm not one to usually say that Alabama, woe is Alabama, or Alabama has a really tough schedule, because as many people often point out, Alabama almost never has the toughest schedule in the SEC, according to the people who rank such things, because Alabama doesn't have to play Alabama. But that November schedule, you look at it, you've got at LSU, you've got at Ole Miss a week later, as brutal a two-game stretch as you can probably imagine for Alabama in recent years. You do have the home FCS game against Austin Peay, but then the 1 week later you turn around and you play the Iron Bowl again in Tuscaloosa. So a little bit of an advantage there, but we know that's a tough game. It'll be year two for Brian Harsin. I think that's a very backloaded schedule to me. That is a schedule that this is, we don't really know exactly what this roster is going to look like, because there's always the chance that guys leave early. But this is a team that the way things line up right now, should have a lot of returning pieces in 2022. This should be one of the more experienced veteran teams on both sides of the ball that Nick Saban has had at Alabama. And I think if you look at the way it lines up, the fact that they'll sort of have all season, no disrespect to, Texas, Arkansas, Texas A&M, but that veteran team will kind of have most of the year to build up towards what looks to be a very intense November schedule. That's going to be a dramatic month of football for this program.
At Ole Miss is the only one that really screams out to me, Matt, because do you think Tennessee is going to be that much better next year? Are they going to beat Alabama next year?
No, I don't have any expectation.
Is Mississippi State going to beat Alabama next year?
No, Mississippi State is pretty far away, I would say.
Okay, so what is the state of the LSU program right now? What's it going to be next year? Is Coach O going to be the coach next year?
That's a valid question, I think.
Alabama has won their last two meetings at LSU 29-0 and 55-17. Okay, the Joe Burrow era is over, and until Coach O can prove that they can rebound with all their amazing recruits that they get and that they can get that program back on track, why should Alabama fans be scared of that game next year? Seriously, why?
So your contention is the toughest game on this 2022 schedule is at Ole Miss.
Yes, absolutely. If Arkansas is who people say they are, maybe they're going in the right direction right now. And so maybe a road game there could be tough. Who knows? Maybe Jimbo Fisher finally has Texas A&M playing at a national championship level by next season. A lot of these questions will be answered this year. We can look ahead and see, but LSU game is not one that really worries me right now, but they won it 2 years ago. So maybe they can LSU is usually very good, because how can you not be with the level of talent that they bring in on an annual basis? So they have future NFL players forever, basically. But Coach O's got to get it right, man. He's got to get it right, because right now they don't look very competitive.
No, I think there's a lot of grumbling going on. I actually just saw a clip last night from Coach O's call-in show in Louisiana, where one of the fans congratulated him on walking out of a stadium over 500 for the first time since the national championship, obviously with a thick dose of sarcasm behind that comment. So LSU fans are getting a little bit tired of Coach O, and we'll see. We'll see how that develops. They've got a big game coming up against Auburn in a couple of weeks here. That honestly could determine a lot about LSU for the next few years. But Ben, I think Alabama's in an interesting place as a program right now. This is as close to a rebuilding year as it gets at Alabama right now. A lot of young guys in key positions. They still look really good. They still look right now like they're probably capable of winning a national championship. But this is a year where I think some learning, some developing needs to be expected. Some patience probably is called for. And 2022 is a year that I think, if you looked at all the normal factors around a college football program, that would be a year that fans circle as this could be a really good year. This should be a year where the team is really set up for success.
They are. But that's happening now too.
Yes, in 2021, but yeah.
The expectation is that Alabama is going to compete every year as long as Nick Saban is the head coach. Going into every season since 2008, the idea has been Alabama is going to be in the national championship picture. And obviously that's fair, right? So look, Alabama has the tools this year. If not Alabama this year, even though Alabama has all of their flaws that were on display at Florida or whatever, then who, right? Which of these college football blue bloods out there right now has proven they're ready to take the crown from Alabama? Not Oklahoma, not Notre Dame, not Ohio State, obviously. Georgia, to a degree, so long as their offense is doing something. Certainly not against Clemson. It didn't look that way. Clemson, certainly not the answer, right? So if not Alabama, then who? Who is going to step up? Is it going to be Ole Miss? Is Georgia finally going to get over the hump? So a lot of other teams have a lot to prove too. I think Alabama's going to be fine until further notice. I mean, and I'm not saying they're going to win out and win another national championship. We've obviously seen seasons play out much differently than that, even when Alabama is one of the best teams in the country. But a lot of these other teams have a lot to prove too.
Well, Alabama's quote-unquote rebuilding year might have timed out with the rest of college football rebuilding at the same time, which, hey, maybe that's just Alabama's luck. Maybe sometimes you need some luck to win a title, and it may line up. We'll see. Ben, great show today. Tons of participation. We love how involved you guys have been getting in the show. A lot of discussion happening just between you guys who are watching. You're talking to each other in there, which I love to see it. Lots of debate about how good this team can be and what they need to do to get to it. And we will obviously be following along with that every week through the season here on Bammers. This is your spot to have your voice heard, be a part of the discussion, and we love having you guys here every week. And we thank our sponsors, as always, the tech program from Mercedes-Benz. And we hope to see you guys again next week. So, Ben, for all of our colleagues at AL.com, I am Matt Scalisi. This has Ben Flanagan, and we will see you guys next week on Bammers.
This show is presented by the Mercedes-Benz Tech Program. To learn more about Mercedes-Benz's world of advanced automotive technology, text the word Mercedes to 55678 or visit www.mercedes-benz.com.